Hello. Today I'd just like to quickly run through a pattern that I've done for a fat quarter quilt, just a small one, using 3 fat quarters. If you've been watching my videos, you've probably seen that I've already done one with 1 fat quarter and one with 2 fat quarters. Now we're doing one with 3 fat quarters, so kind of more of the same thing, but just again, just to show you, you might have just a couple of fat quarters or 3 fat quarters that work nicely together that you'd like to use up in a quilt without going to too much more effort than that. So I've done a pattern for one with 3 fat quarters, which is available as a free downloadable pattern on my website, gourmetquilter.com. You can just go to the site and download the pattern. So I just thought I'd quickly show you how to go about the cutting of it and the laying out of it. So as I said, it's fairly similar to the other ones, but this one's a whole new quilt. So I'll just show you. Now I've got my 3 fat quarters chosen here. This very delicious one with these Japanese parasol type things on, and a couple of other Japanese taupe type fabrics that I felt went nicely with it. So what I've got is a fat quarter, which is approximately 18 inches along the selvage and half the width of the fabric, so somewhere between 21 and 22 inches wide. So I'm folding my fat quarters so that the selvage and the cut edge are together, rather than around the other way. I wanted it that way, and I've actually laid all 3 of them down. So I've lined them up with the markings of my board, so that's just actually 6 layers of fabric we're cutting through this time, but this gets them all cut in one go. And I'm just going to trim off that edge so that I've got a nice edge to work with. So cutting through all 6 layers of fabric all in one go, so just be careful that it's not too much. If it's a little bit wonky, you might want to only go through 2 fat quarters or something like that. So we're going to cut into 5-inch strips. So I'm going to come along my board and cut at 5 inches, and I'm going to come again at another 5 inches, and I'm going to cut again at yet another 5 inches. So you can see that that fits nicely in the fat quarters. There's a little strip left that can be trimmed and go into a leftovers pantry. And now we're going to cut these into 5-inch squares, and so I'm going to lay these down, the 3 of them, so that we can have a little bit of variety. I don't have to cut them all while you watch particularly. I'll just do these 3. So I've got the 3 laid together. I've got the selvages extending here. I'm going to trim those off. Selvages can shrink in the wash. And I'm lining that up nicely with my board. And I'm going to just trim off those selvages. And again, we're going to cut at 5-inch intervals so that we get 5-inch squares. So of course you could make this quilt with just 5-inch squares rather than fat quarters, but I thought we'd do it with fat quarters. So you can actually get 12 5-inch squares comfortably out of a fat quarter, so that's probably quite a handy thing to know. And I'm going to cut those later, and I have the pattern tells you how much fabric you need for the borders and the binding as well. So I've already actually cut mine. You need to have, I use the same fabric for the, it has an inner border, so I'm using the same fabric for the inner border and my binding, and then another fabric for the main border. So I've chosen to use a black for my inner border and binding, and I've already cut that. They're cut at 1.5 inches. The pattern tells you all this. And my binding strips I've also cut. They're cut at 2.5 inches, and then my main border is cut at 4.5 inches. So I've already cut those from the fabrics, but I just thought I'd lay a little bit out just so that you can just see, not that there's anything terribly technical about all this, but it's kind of nice to see what's going on. So that just, it works really well with the fat quarters, using up pretty much all the squares each time, so that there's not really a lot of wastage. That's one of the beauties of this sort of thing. But I thought these colours were quite, perhaps a little bit dull for some people, but quite exciting in other ways. So that I'll just continue on doing more of that. Oops. And then I'm going to have my nice narrow border along here. And I'm going down the other way as well. And then I've got this fairly dark grey. Again, I just thought this was just a little bit different. I really like this parasol fabric and I had to find something that was going to work with it. So that's what I found. And then I'll just have a narrow the black binding around the outside edge, and I just think that's quite pleasing to the eye. So the quilt that it makes with these 3 fat quarters is approximately 42 inches square, so it makes quite a nice lap size or maybe a tabletop quilt. There's lots of things you could do with a quilt like that, or for a child it could be just a nice floor quilt. So I have made one up in much brighter colours, quite different. So that's 3 fat quarters and some borders, makes into that fun little quilt. As I said, it would be great on the tabletop, it would be great on the floor for a young child, or just for a child's quilt, or a lap quilt, any number of things. Great idea for 3 fat quarters.